The bathroom door swung open with a violence that shattered the evening's fragile peace. Inside the cramped space, where the scent of cheap bleach mingled with the lingering perfume of 100 rushed repairs to makeup and dignity, a scene unfolded that would change everything. Maria Santos stood with her back pressed against the cold tile wall, her uniform still damp from wine deliberately spilled on her minutes before. Her hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of accumulated indignities, the 1,000 small cruelties that had built up over months until this moment, when Gregory Walsh, the restaurant manager, had finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. His hand gripped her arm with bruising force. His face contorted with rage that seemed to exceed any reasonable response to a waitress who had dared to politely correct him when he blamed her for a customer complaint that wasn't her fault. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, could see the far way his eyes had gone cold and calculating, the way men's eyes go when they believe they hold all the power and the woman before them holds none. He had grabbed her in full view of the kitchen staff, dragged her through the swinging doors while other servers looked away, pretending not to see, protecting their own positions by offering no protection to her. And now they were here, in this small tiled room, and Maria understood with a clarity that cut like broken glass that this man believed he could do whatever he wanted to her and face no consequences. What Gregory Walsh did not know, what he could not have known because Maria had spent 3 years carefully separating her two lives, was that sitting in booth 7, the corner table with the view of the street, was a man who had watched every moment of that brutal march across the restaurant floor. A man whose stillness was more terrifying than any show of force. A man whose love for Maria was the one soft place in a heart otherwise forged in violence and survival. A man who went by many names in the city's underground, but who answered to only one name at home: husband. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Every story of justice must first establish the injustice. Every tale of reckoning must first show us what made that reckoning necessary. So let us step back. Let us understand who these people are, how they came to this moment, and why what happens next will echo far beyond the walls of one restaurant on one autumn evening. Maria Santos had come to America 17 years ago with dreams that glowed like embers in her chest. She was 21 years old, speaking broken English, carrying a single suitcase and her mother's rosary. The daughter of a schoolteacher. From a small village outside San Salvador, she had grown up surrounded by books and the belief that education was the pathway to a better life. But when the violence came to her village, when the gangs made it clear that young women had two choices: join them or become their victims, Maria's mother had sold everything they owned to buy her daughter a chance at escape. The journey north had been brutal. We need not detail the horrors that Maria endured in those desert crossings, in those safe houses that were anything but safe. Enough to say that she arrived in America already understanding that survival sometimes requires swallowing your dignity, that the world is often cruel to those it deems powerless, that the only way forward is through. She worked with a determination that bordered on desperation, cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night, sending money home to her mother whenever she could, learning English from library books and television shows. Slowly, painfully, building a life in a country that made clear every day that she was unwelcome, that her presence was merely tolerated, that she existed at the mercy of those who held citizenship like a weapon. Well, she had no papers, no legal status. She lived in the shadows, one phone call away from deportation, from losing everything she had built. And people like Gregory Walsh, managers and supervisors, and anyone who held even a tiny amount of power over her employment, they knew this. They knew that women like Maria could be pushed and exploited and abused because the alternative to enduring abuse was losing everything. For 3 years, Maria had worked at Lombardi's, an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of the city where businessmen entertained clients and couples celebrated anniversaries. She was exceptional at her job. She remembered faces and orders, could read a table's mood and adjust her service accordingly, never intrusive but always attentive. The customers loved her. The tips were decent. And for a woman with no papers and limited options, it was as close to stability as she dared to hope for. But Gregory Walsh had made those 3 years increasingly unbearable. His comments about her accent, his habit of assigning her the worst sections, the tables least likely to tip well, his way of blaming her whenever anything went wrong, and lately, something darker. The way his hand would linger when he passed her in narrow hallways. The suggestions that maybe she could improve her schedule if she were willing to be more friendly. The implication, never quite stated but always present, that her immigration status was something he could weaponize if she didn't comply with his unspoken demands. Maria had endured it all because she had no choice. Because speaking up meant risking her job. Because complaining meant potentially being reported. Because she lived in a world where men like Gregory held all the cards and women like her simply tried to survive each day. She was not alone in this experience. She knew other servers who had suffered similar treatment, who had made the same calculations about silence and survival. The restaurant industry had a reputation for such things, and Maria had learned to navigate its particular cruelties with the same determination that had carried her across the desert years before. But tonight, something had shifted. Tonight, when he grabbed her arm and dragged her toward that bathroom, when she saw fate, calculation in his eyes and understood his intentions, something in Maria's carefully controlled exterior cracked, and she had looked up, one desperate glance across the restaurant floor, and her eyes had met her husband's. Alessandro Rossi. That was the name he went by in Maria's world, though it was not the name that appeared in police files or whispered in fearful tones by those who knew better than to cross him. He was 42 years old when he met Maria, a man who had spent his entire adult life in the violent machinery of organized crime. Born into a family where such things were simply the way of the world, he had risen through the ranks through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. He had killed men, had ordered deaths, had overseen operations that would have earned him multiple life sentences if the law had ever managed to gather sufficient evidence. He was feared, respected, and very, very dangerous. But he had one weakness, one crack in his armor of cold pragmatism. 5 years ago, he had walked into a small diner at 3 a.m. after a meeting that had gone poorly, a meeting that had required him to make decisions that left blood on his hands and exhaustion in his bones. Maria had been his waitress that night. She had brought him coffee and eggs without being asked, had somehow sensed that he needed silence more than conversation, had simply let him exist in that space, without demands or expectations. There had been no recognition in her eyes, no fear or calculation. She had treated him like a human being, nothing more, nothing less. And something in Alessandro, something he had thought long dead, had stirred to life. He had come back the next night. And the next. And slowly, carefully, they had begun to talk. Maria knew he was involved in something dangerous. She was not naive. But she also saw something in him that others missed. She saw the man who left enormous tips because he understood what it meant to struggle. The man who spoke gently to her even when his phone rang with urgent business. The man who asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. When he finally told her the truth about who he was, what he did, she had been afraid. But not of him. She had been afraid for him. Afraid that the violence of his world would eventually take him from her. And Alessandro, who had never once allowed himself to be vulnerable, found himself falling completely and irrevocably in love. They married quietly, secretly, in a small ceremony with no witnesses beyond the judge and her assistant. Alessandro used his considerable resources and connections to begin the process of securing Maria's immigration status, working through lawyers who knew better than to ask questions. He wanted to give her everything, to pull her out of the world of low-wage labor and constant fear. But Maria had insisted on maintaining some independence, on continuing to work, on not becoming entirely dependent on a man whose livelihood existed outside the law. So they had compromised. She would keep working, but he would ensure her safety. She would maintain her own life, but he would be there, always, watching from the shadows, ready to step in if anyone ever threatened her. And so Alessandro had become a regular at Lombardi's, though few staff members knew the connection between the quiet man in booth 7 and the waitress who served other sections. He would sit there, seemingly absorbed in his newspaper or his phone, ordering simple meals and leaving. But he was always watching, always aware, always ready. And tonight, he had watched Gregory Walsh's hand close around Maria's arm, had seen the fear flash across her face, had observed the way the other staff members looked away, complicit in their silence, had tracked the trajectory of that forced march toward the bathroom. And something in Alessandro, something held tightly in him, checked by years of discipline and control, had begun to strain against its bonds. In the bathroom, Gregory's fingers tightened on Maria's wrist, his breath hot and sour against her face. "You think you're so much better than me? You think you can correct me in front of customers? You're nothing. You're nobody. You're an illegal who should be grateful I give you this job. And maybe it's time you showed me just how grateful you are." Maria's voice, when she finally spoke, carried a quality that made Gregory pause, something steely beneath the fear. "Let go of me. Now." Gregory laughed, a sound without humor. "Or what? You'll report me. To who? Immigration? The police? You think anyone cares about what happens to you?" He moved closer, backing her further into the corner, and Maria's hand reached behind her, fingers brushing the tile wall, searching for anything, any leverage, any escape. Her mind raced through options, all of them bad. She could scream, but would anyone come? Could she fight him off, but at what cost to her job, her future? The panic rose in her throat, but beneath it, something else. A strange calm. Because she knew something Gregory didn't. She knew that help was coming. She knew that the man in booth 7 had seen everything. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that Gregory Walsh had made the last mistake of his comfortable, consequence-free life. The bathroom door opened. No knock. No warning. Just a smooth, controlled opening that spoke of someone accustomed to entering rooms where they might not be welcome. Alessandro stood in the doorway, filling the frame despite being of average height. It was not his physical size that commanded the space, but something else. A presence. An authority that came from years of being a man whom others obeyed without question. He looked at Maria first, his eyes scanning her face, her torn sleeve, the way she stood pressed against the wall. Then his gaze moved to Gregory, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Gregory's hand released Maria's wrist as if burned. He stepped back, confusion warring with indignation on his face. "Excuse me, this is the women's restroom. You need to leave. Now, go." Alessandro did not move. Did not blink. No. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "No. You will leave. You will walk out of this bathroom, collect your belongings from your office, and you will never return to this restaurant. You will not speak to my wife again." You will not contact her. You will not think about her. And you will spend the rest of your life being very, very grateful that I am choosing to let you walk out of here. Gregory's face flushed with anger and confusion. Your wife? I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the manager here. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing and threatening me. Alessandro smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. Please do call the police. I would love to explain to them what I witnessed from my table. A manager physically assaulting an employee, dragging her into a bathroom against her will, cornering her in a confined space. I have been recording everything on my phone since you first grabbed her arm. I imagine the police would be very interested in that footage. Of course, I also have many connections in this city. Judges, district attorneys, news reporters who would find this story very compelling. A manager abusing an immigrant woman. Can you imagine the headlines? The social media response? The lawsuits, both criminal and civil. Not to mention what the restaurant owners will do when they discover that their manager's behavior has made them liable for millions in damages. He took one step into the bathroom, and Gregory involuntarily stepped back. Or perhaps you would prefer to handle this the other way. Perhaps you would like to know exactly who I am. Would you like me to give you names? Organizations I am affiliated with? Perhaps you have heard stories about what happens to people who harm the people I love. Perhaps you have read about the men who disappeared after crossing certain lines. Perhaps you wonder if those stories are true. The color drained from Gregory's face. He was not a stupid man, merely an entitled one. And he was beginning to understand that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The man before him spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had never made an empty threat. The way he stood, the controlled violence implied in every muscle, the absolute certainty that he would do exactly what he said he would do. Gregory looked at Maria, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a powerless immigrant waitress, but a woman protected by forces he could not comprehend. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll resign. Please, I have a family. Alessandro's expression did not change. Then perhaps you should have considered them before you decided to assault a woman in your workplace. Perhaps you should have thought about the consequences of your actions before you spent months making my wife's life miserable. Perhaps you should have asked yourself what kind of man abuses power over vulnerable people, and then expects mercy when he finally faces accountability. He turned to Maria, his voice softening. Are you hurt? Maria shook her head, tears finally spilling over. Not from fear, but from relief, from the overwhelming rush of knowing that she was safe, that someone had seen her, had protected her, that she was not alone. No, I'm okay now. Alessandro nodded and looked back at Gregory. You will leave now. You will write a letter of resignation, citing personal reasons. You will not ask for a reference. You will not speak to anyone here about what happened tonight. And you will understand that I will be watching. If you ever approach my wife again, if you ever attempt to contact her, or threaten her, or harm her reputation in any way, we'll discover that there are consequences far worse than losing your job. Do you understand me? Gregory nodded, his earlier bravado completely shattered. He moved toward the door, giving Alessandro a wide berth, his hands shaking as he fumbled for the handle. Before he could leave, Alessandro spoke once more. One more thing. Every employee in this restaurant who turned away when you grabbed my wife, who pretended not to see, who chose their paycheck over basic human decency, they also bear responsibility. But that is not your concern anymore. That is mine. Now go. Gregory fled. The door swung shut behind him, and in the sudden silence, Maria let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. Alessandro crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, his careful control finally cracking just slightly as he held her close. "I'm so sorry. I should have ended this months ago. I should have made him afraid the first time he disrespected you. I was trying to let you handle it your way, trying to respect your independence. But I should have protected you better." Maria pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "You did protect me. You're protecting me now. And you let me try to be strong on my own first. That matters. But Alessandro, I don't want to work here anymore. I thought I needed the job, needed the independence, but I'm tired. I'm so tired of being treated like I don't matter." Alessandro kissed her forehead gently. "You never have to go back to any job that makes you feel less than you are. We will figure something else out together. But first, we are going to have a conversation with the owner of this restaurant. And we are going to make sure that what happened here tonight leads to real changes, not just for you, but for every person who works in fear of people like Gregory Walsh." They left the bathroom together, Alessandro's arm protectively around Maria's shoulders. The restaurant had gone quiet, all eyes on them as they emerged. The kitchen staff clustered near the swinging doors, some looking ashamed, others curious. Other servers had stopped moving, frozen in the middle of their tasks. And at the host stand, trying to look busy, was Edoardo Lombardi. Phil, owner's son who managed the front of house. Alessandro guided Maria to a nearby chair, and then turned his attention to Edoardo, who had gone pale. "Mr. Lombardi, we need to talk. In your office. Now, do." Edoardo nodded, unable to find words, and led them through to the small office behind the kitchen. Once inside, Alessandro did not sit. He stood, and his posture carried the weight of a man about to deliver an ultimatum. "What happened tonight is unacceptable. But it is not surprising. Your manager, Gregory Walsh, has been creating a hostile work environment for months. He physically assaulted my wife tonight, dragged her into a bathroom with what I can only assume were the worst of intentions. I have video evidence of this assault. I am within my rights to contact the police, to file criminal charges, to pursue a civil lawsuit that would bankrupt this restaurant and destroy your family's reputation. Do you understand the position you are in?" Edoardo found his voice shaky but present. "I had no idea. Gregory, he's been with us for 5 years. I trusted him to run this place. If I had known..." Alessandro cut him off with a gesture. "But you should have known. Your staff has been complaining for months. My wife told your hostess weeks ago that Gregory made her uncomfortable. Other employees have mentioned his behavior in passing. But you chose not to look closely, because he made you money, because he kept things running smoothly, because it was easier to ignore the small complaints of powerless workers than to address the real problems. That is your responsibility. That is your failure." He pulled out his phone and showed Edoardo the video, watching the younger man's face crumple as he saw exactly what had happened in his restaurant. "Here is what is going to happen. Gregory is gone. He has already resigned. You will conduct a full review of your workplace policies with a real HR consultant, not just a lawyer protecting your interests, but someone who actually understands how to create safe workplaces. You will implement mandatory training on harassment and assault prevention. You will create an anonymous reporting system so employees can raise concerns without fear of retaliation. You will review your hiring and management practices to ensure that people like Gregory cannot abuse their power. And you will compensate Maria for what she has endured here, not with a small check and a non-disclosure agreement, but with a genuine acknowledgement of harm and meaningful reparation." Edoardo nodded frantically. "Yes, all of that. Whatever you want. Please don't go to the media or the police. My father built this restaurant over 40 years. It would destroy him." Alessandro leaned forward slightly. "Then, perhaps your father should have been more careful about who he put in charge. But I am not interested in destroying your family business. I'm interested in making sure that what happened to my wife never happens to another employee here. I am interested in actual change, not performative apologies. You have 1 week to present me with a detailed plan showing how you will implement these changes. If I am satisfied, we will consider this matter resolved. If I am not, or if I hear that you have retaliated against Maria, or any other employee who speaks up about this situation, then you will discover that I have resources and connections that make your worst legal nightmares seem pleasant by comparison. Do we understand each other?" Eduardo understood completely. And in the weeks that followed, Lombardi's underwent a transformation. New policies were implemented. Staff meetings addressed the culture of silence and complicity. Employees who had been too afraid to speak before found their voices. Eduardo, to his credit, took the lesson seriously. He brought in consultants, reformed his management structure, and turned what could have been a disaster into an opportunity for genuine growth. But the story does not end there, because the events of that night rippled outward in ways that extended beyond one restaurant. Maria, freed from the burden of enduring abuse for the sake of economic survival, began working with a non-profit that helped immigrant women navigate their complex terrain of work, legal status, and safety. She used her own experience to counsel others, to help them understand that they deserve dignity regardless of their documentation status. Alessandro, who had spent his life in violence, found himself funding organizations that protected vulnerable people, creating anonymous donation streams that supported women's shelters and legal aid clinics and job training programs. He could not undo what he was, could not erase the blood on his hands, but he could use his resources to protect people like Maria. And Gregory Walsh? He disappeared from the restaurant industry entirely, taking a job where his capacity for causing harm was significantly limited. Whether he learned anything from his experience is unclear. Some people change when confronted with consequences, others simply become more careful about not getting caught. But he never contacted Maria again, and he never worked in a position of power over vulnerable people again, which was, if not justice, at least a kind of protection. What happened that night in Lombardi's bathroom was not unique. Every day, in restaurants and hotels and office buildings and factories across the world, people in positions of power abuse those who have less. Every day, workers endure harassment and assault because they need their jobs more than they need their dignity. Every day, the vulnerable make calculations about what they can endure and what will break them. Every day, the system protects abusers and punishes victims. And every day, most stories do not have the ending that Maria's did. Most stories do not have someone powerful enough to shift the balance. Most people face their Gregory Walsh alone. This is the uncomfortable truth we must confront. We live in a world where power determines whose story gets believed, whose pain gets acknowledged, whose suffering matters. We have built systems that protect predators and silence victims. We have created economies where people must accept abuse as the price of survival. And we tell ourselves comfortable lies about how if people just worked harder, if they just made better choices, if they just stood up for themselves, everything would be fine. But the truth is uglier than that. The truth is that the same systems that allowed Gregory to drag Maria into that bathroom, that allowed him to abuse his position for months with no consequences, those systems are still in place. Those dynamics are still operating. And until we dismantle them completely, stories like Maria's will continue to repeat. But here's the other truth. the one that offers something like hope. Every single person who witnesses injustice has a choice. Every employee who looked away when Gregory grabbed Maria's arm made a choice. Every supervisor who ignored complaints, every colleague who stayed silent, every customer who saw something wrong and said nothing, they all made choices. And if enough people chose differently, if enough people decided that protecting each other mattered more than protecting their own comfort, if enough people were willing to risk something to stand up for what was right, then maybe, just maybe, the balance of power could shift. You do not need to be connected to organized crime to protect people. You do not need wealth or connections or physical strength. What you need is moral courage. The courage to speak up when you see someone being mistreated. The courage to believe victims when they tell you about their experiences. The courage to risk your own position to protect someone more vulnerable than yourself. The courage to recognize that your silence is complicity, that your inaction is a choice, that doing nothing is itself a form of violence. Maria's story ended better than most because she had someone powerful willing to act on her behalf. But what about all the Marias who don't? What about all the people enduring abuse right now, wondering if anyone would come to their defense if they were dragged into a bathroom or cornered in a storage room or propositioned by a supervisor? What about all the Gregory Walshes who will never face consequences because no one with power cares enough to stop them? This is why these stories matter. Not because they offer us easy answers or comfortable resolutions. Not because they make us feel good about the world. But because they hold up a mirror and force us to see the systems we participate in, the cruelty we enable, the suffering we allow. They demand that we ask ourselves hard questions. Would I have looked away when Maria was grabbed? Would I have intervened? Would I have believed her if she had reported what happened? Would I have stood with her or protected my job? Would I have been brave or complicit? And most importantly, what will I do the next time I witness injustice? Will I be different? Will I be better? Because here is the final truth, the one that should keep us awake at night, drive us to action during the day. We are all connected. Maria's suffering diminishes all of us. Gregory's abuse implicates all of us. The systems that failed her are the systems we all navigate and uphold and participate in every single day. When we allow people to be treated as disposable, when we create economies that force people to choose between dignity and survival, when we build hierarchies that concentrate power in the hands of people who have never known powerlessness, we damage not just individuals, but the entire fabric of our shared humanity. If this story has touched something in you, if it has made you angry or sad or reflective, then sit with those feelings. Do not push them away. Do not comfort yourself with the thought that it could never happen to you or someone you love. It can. It does. It is happening right now, somewhere, to someone who is just as human and valuable as you are. And the question is not whether you have the power to fix every broken system and save every vulnerable person. The question is simpler and harder than that. The question is, what will you do with the power you do have, however limited that power might seem? Will you use it to protect or to harm? To speak up or stay silent? To change systems or uphold them? Maria kept the uniform from that night, the one with the torn sleeve. She keeps it in her closet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that she survived. That she found her voice. That she was protected when protection mattered. But also a reminder that millions of others are not. That the world is full of Gregory Walshes and too few people willing to stop them. That the fight for dignity and justice is never finished. Never won completely, always. Requiring renewed commitment and courage. Every story holds a truth, and the truth in this one is uncomfortable and necessary. The truth is that our compassion cannot be selective. Our protection of the vulnerable cannot be conditional. Our willingness to act on behalf of justice cannot depend on whether the victim happens to be connected to someone powerful. Every person deserves what Maria received that night. To be seen, to be believed, to be protected, to have someone willing to say, "This is wrong, and I will not allow it to continue." Every person deserves to work without fear of assault. Every person deserves to exist without calculating how much abuse they can endure before they break. Every person deserves dignity. So if this story has moved you, if it has sparked something in your heart, then do not let that spark die. Feed it. Let it grow into action. The next time you see someone being mistreated, speak up. The next time you hear about workplace abuse, believe the victim. The next time you witness injustice, even small injustice, even the kind that seems too minor to matter, intervene. Support organizations that protect vulnerable workers. Advocate for stronger labor protections and harassment policies. Use whatever platform you have, however small, to tell stories that matter, to amplify voices that are too often silenced, to shine light into the corners where abuse thrives in darkness. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard.